Why are today's youth so nasty? I teach a vocational subject in a private middle school and a private after-school club. In both of these settings I have students aged 10-14 who are just downright cruel to other students. Saying things like I'm not working with him, nobody likes him, and purposely embarrassing others for all to hear. They maintain that they wouldn't care if someone said the same things about them. And I've tried giving them a hard talking to about how they'll lose friends as they get older, as people will see them as mean and unfriendly, but they shrugged their shoulders at me. I don't ever remember being so cruel as a teen, nor this attitude in school. Was I just lucky as a youth? Are kids more unkind nowadays? If so, what is the cause? You were lucky if you didn't endure this. I did. The kids did horrible stuff. Kids that age have always been jackals. I wouldn't go back to junior high for all the money in the world. Two things that have always been happening. The kind of behaviors you're rightfully criticizing. People making generalizations saying other gens are worse for one reason or another. IDK of any proof that today's kids are nastier. For better or worse. They're just people and history repeats itself. You were lucky as a kid. Kids have always been like that. When I was a kid, there was this girl who would try to convince people to kill themselves. She would do it on the bus so there would be no adults around to hear it. I'm 43. As far back in school as I can remember. Even in elementary I remember kids getting bullied pretty bad. This new generation isn't any worse. You are just getting old tears of joy. Children are usually mean. Their concept of how their actions can affect others isn't really settled in yet. And as a kid it's cool to be mean to others. You can do what you can, but children usually can be quite mean. The nastiest kids I ever went to school with were at a private junior high. We moved, so I finished junior high at a low middle income public school. And the kids were so much nicer. This was in the 90s. Your sample size is pretty limited to this one demographic. I wouldn't judge an entire generation on that. I can only speak for about 10-15 years ago. But when I was growing up, kids were absolutely saying things like nobody likes you to other kids' faces and getting mean and violent with their friends. You're not paying very much attention if you haven't noticed that bullying narratives have existed in stories for ages. Kids are just mean. They always have been and always will be. You were definitely just lucky. I got nicknamed Ugly Ron, and there wasn't even another kid named Ron at the entire school. The first time I had a gun pulled on me I was 14. It was a regular occurrence for people to spread the most awful gossip about each other. And God forbid anything was actually true. If someone thought you were gay, they'd stomp the shit out of you. The school tried to get us to dissect cow eyeballs in science class, but a couple guys started throwing them at the only white girl in our grade. Then it was just a free-for-all. This was in the late 90s. Early 2000s. Question mark, question mark, question mark. This is how I got bullied as a kid, just as bad. This isn't anything new. Sounds like you were just lucky. And maybe perhaps sheltered as a youth. Every generation repeats the same, talking about the next previous generation. About how theirs was the greatest and the newest one is horrible. As for this conversation you overheard, this is nothing in comparison to the day-to-day life of the majority of kids who went to school in my generation, which the boomers called Gen X, or the slacker generation. The cruelty of children is well known. Private schoolgirls can outdo spies at psychological warfare. Yeah, I think you may have just been lucky. I remember how girls treated each other from ages 10-12 or so. Just absolute psychopathic behavior for no obvious reason. I was a quieter, kind of nerdy girl, so I was an easy mark. I hope most of them grew out of it. Kids can be awful. It's always been like this. It's not unusual for a poor weird ugly kid to grow up with no friends and be savagely bullied every day. I'm talking being ridiculed, harassed, dehumanized, excluded, physically assaulted, daily. Stuff that an adult could get arrested for or fired from their job. Kids are evil. And if you didn't experience this, then you must have been lucky. I think social media has made it worse. But then that goes for adults as well. Middle school is just a nasty age. In my experience, kids these days are more empathetic and open to differences in others than I was 20 years ago. Kids have always been assholes. Rude little shits. In my experience, people don't really grow out of this till they are around 30 lol. I was in middle school in the late 80s, early 90s. If you think kids then weren't complete assholes, then you might have been one of them. Lol. But if the kids today are worse, who do you think raised them? You were lucky. I had similar experiences on a daily basis at that age. My dude. Someone planted and detonated a pipe bomb at my middle school. There were several stabbings and a high-profile shooting over drug deals. There were 3 fatal drunk driving accidents that killed a total of about 14 students in 1 year. Again, in middle school. This was all during my 8th grade year. Most of the above kids were 11-13. Be thankful that you had a sheltered, and probably middle class or better, childhood. Actually, I heard youths are more tame now than in the past. Missed critical social development during pandemic. Everyone got a little fucked up from that. More so the elementary schoolers. Yeah, you're describing things I remember happening in my schools in the 80s, 90s. I saw it happen. Had it happened to me. And I'm not proud to say I did it to other kids sometimes. Kids can be absolutely awful to each other. Because they're still learning emotions and empathy at that age. That's not a new thing. Kids grow up on the internet these days, and the rules of the internet are pretty much say what you want, be mean, and if anyone tells you otherwise, act like you don't give the slightest damn because you have thick skin, so everyone else should too. Now add childhood immaturity to it. Adults are particularly nasty these days. I don't know, maybe you didn't want to see it or had a friend group who stayed away from it. I tell my kids to the teacher, come to us. I used to call them out and get into fights. Apparently I was a troublemaker though. Not the bullies. It did stop. Middle school students are insufferable, and it is insufferable to be a middle schooler. Truly horrible time of life when everything is confusing and your body doesn't make sense and social rules keep changing as you grow. You teach at a private school and a private club. I'm guessing a good number of those parents are teaching their kids' behavior by example. Several kids were driven to suicide due to relentless bullying when I was 10-14. My school was near the train tracks, so at least one kid a year would jump in front of the passing train. Kids have always been nasty little shits. The people that say kids aren't cruel must have never seen one in real life. Because teachers are no longer allowed to check them or keep them in line. Teachers who attempt to discipline them are forced out or just quit entirely because management doesn't have their back. My mom was a teacher for almost 30 years. She quit a few years back because it got real bad. Today's youth isn't any nastier than the youth of the past was. You were either lucky, sheltered, or oblivious. There's a quote from Mike Tyson. Allegedly, social media made y'all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. It's the what's on your mind mentality and the lack of hard consequences from speaking your mind recklessly that trained these kids to be so brazen. I blame the parents. Then I blame the parents. Lastly, I blame the parents.